Founded in 1996, Evergrande is the second largest property developer in China. But it's now on the brink of collapse, with the central bank saying that Evergrande's troubles could expose China's financial system to systemic risk. So what happened, and what will China's government do about it? Is it too big to fail? And why is controlled chaos the secret to limiting Evergrande's damage to the economy? Oh, and also, why does one legendary investor who predicted the collapse of Enron think that while Evergrande's collapse might not be that bad, it could be symptomatic of a much larger and more serious problem? This is the Breakdown by Switchboard. Welcome to Switchboard, where we bring interesting stories from the world of business, finance, and politics. Homeownership is a middle-class dream. Why waste your money renting when you can put that same money towards owning your own home? It's one of the most popular ways of building your wealth. The bet is that the value of their properties will keep rising, increasing their wealth at the same time. And it's the same in China, with nearly 75% of household wealth tied up in the real estate market. Evergrande rode the homeownership dream to its status as the second largest property developer in China. Not only that, but they aggressively expanded into new markets such as electric cars, wealth management, professional soccer, and bottled water. But all of the growth didn't come cheap, and now they're the most indebted company in the world with more than $300 billion in debt. Talk about aggressive expansion. In their core market of real estate, the business model is simple. They pre-sell and take down payments on homes years before they're finished, give commercial IOUs to contractors, and use the rising value of their real estate projects to get loans to fund the shortfall. For years, as the property market boomed, everything was great. More people wanted to buy homes, even as prices skyrocketed. Evergrande continued to expand, taking on more and more projects. To fund their rapid growth, they would continue to borrow more and more money. But at some point, the appreciation of the real estate market becomes unmanageable, shutting the door on newer home buyers. The value of Chinese properties is increasing at an exponential pace, sparking worries of a housing bubble. Housing prices have surged sixfold over the last 15 years, making Shenzhen less affordable than London. The Chinese real estate sector accounts for about 29% of economic output. So if there is a housing bubble and it pops, the damage to the economy could be massive. The rest of the world is worried the damage could cause a domino effect internationally, but we'll get into that in a bit. Worried about a housing bubble, in August 2020, the government decided to step in and make sure that property developers weren't getting too reckless with debt. They introduced a policy called the 3 red lines. These were 3 key metrics property developers would have to meet if they wanted to finance their debts and continue to borrow money in the future. With more than $300 billion in debt, Evergrande blew past all 3 red lines. This restricted their ability to borrow money, but more importantly, they were now severely limited in how they could fund their real estate projects. At the same time, China's real estate market was slowing down, which led to less demand for homes from property developers like Evergrande. In August 2021, sales were down 25% from a year ago. So on one hand, they're trying to raise funds to cut down on debt to become compliant with financial regulations. On the other hand, they have less sales coming in because of lack of demand. Oh, and the fact that their financial troubles were very public wasn't inspiring customer confidence either. It's like they just can't catch a break. To help raise funds, they sold their 20% stake in Shenzhen Bank to a state-owned asset management company for $1.5 billion. The proceeds were paid to Shenzhen Bank to cover loans that Evergrande had with them. This hints at what Evergrande's strategy might be to get out of its massive debt problems. More on that later. Caught in a cash crunch, Evergrande decided to turn to, shall we say, alternative sources of funding. Evergrande employees were told that they had to put a certain amount of money into Evergrande Wealth, its wealth management product. If they failed to do so, their bonuses would be docked. Because there was a quota for employees, a lot of times employees even asked their friends and families to invest. Others borrowed money from the bank. Then in September 2021, Evergrande suddenly stopped paying back these short-term loans which had been packaged as high-interest investments. They also stopped paying contractors and suppliers working on many of their projects, some of whom had even put their own homes as collateral to finance their work with Evergrande while they waited for payment. They waited and waited, but payment never came. Then the panic started, and they refused to keep working on the properties. In a sign of how bad things were financially for the company, Evergrande tried to give suppliers and contractors unfinished properties such as unsold apartments, retail, and parking spaces as payment for what they owed their vendors. Vendors refused, Apparently, they needed money to pay their employees. A half-finished property was useless to them. I'm sure no one saw that coming. And with contractors stopping work on hundreds of Evergrande properties, customers who had already put down substantial down payments were now worried too. It's estimated that Evergrande is on the hook for 1.6 million unfinished apartments. Millions of people worried about whether they would get what they were owed. Customers, vendors, and even employees were protesting in front of Evergrande's offices. It did not look good. With over $300 billion in debt, investors were worried about the ripple effects the collapse of Evergrande could have on the broader financial markets. Through the end of 2022, foreign investors are owed more than $7.4 billion. And that's just a start. At the end of September 2021, Evergrande had interest payments due on 3 different bonds. The domestic bond had a payment of $36 million due. On September 22nd, Evergrande reported that the interest payment had been settled in negotiations outside the market, without providing any information on whether it was paid or not. The more interesting case is the international bonds with combined interest payments of almost $129 million due on September 23rd and 29th. Evergrande missed both those interest payments. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It was probably the best decision they could have made. Even though the payment due date for the international bonds had passed, there's actually a grace period of 30 days for both payments. Even if they do intend to honor the bond payment, it would be in their best interest to wait until the last possible moment to pay it. Or maybe they're just optimizing their chance of survival by focusing on their domestic debt, which would make sense considering that the majority of their debt is held domestically. Either way, things are looking pretty grim. Many are calling Evergrande China's Lehman Brothers. You know, the Lehman Brothers that kicked off the 2008 recession. They're worried about contagion. In economic terms, contagion is the spread of an economic crisis from one market to another, both domestically and internationally. But chances are Evergrande itself failing won't trigger contagion. The worry is that Evergrande's failure to pay will set off a chain reaction. Suppliers and contractors will go bankrupt, the price of commodities will fall, real estate prices will collapse, banks will call their loans, and other heavily indebted property developers will collapse under the pressure. China has seen how the story ends. Surely they've taken away some lessons from the demise of Lehman Brothers. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, also has much more control over the economy than the US government does. They could directly help Evergrande if they wanted to, but chances are they won't directly intervene themselves. We'll get into why in a bit, but while there are similarities between Evergrande and Lehman Brothers, there are many more differences. The majority of Evergrande's debt is held inside China. Only about $19 billion is estimated to be held by foreign investors. While China may be the second largest economy in the world, it is much more insulated than the US. The US is the financial capital of the world. They are much more integrated with the rest of the world than China. This means when something happens in the US, there can be ripple effects worldwide, whereas China is more self-contained. Also, unlike Lehman Brothers, Evergrande has real, albeit illiquid assets. They can't just sell parts of their real estate portfolio as a lot of it is in the midst of construction. No one is interested in buying half-finished projects. Also, selling real estate isn't a quick or easy process. Ultimately, Chinese banks are financially strong enough to absorb the blow from Evergrande's collapse. The banks are literally backed by the government and does what it asks them to do. As the Financial Times put it, the whole point of China's mostly self-contained financial system is that most of the debt is owed by one part of the country to another. The party is in control of all of those parts, and so the debt is essentially whatever the party says it is. Could the CCP make all of Evergrande's problems go away? Yes. Will they? No. So why won't the CCP bail out Evergrande? Recently, the government has been increasingly talking more and more about common prosperity. Common prosperity is about narrowing the ever-widening wealth gap between the rich and the poor. The optics of bailing out the second largest property developer in China, whose founder has received $8 billion in dividends in the past 10 years, doesn't look good. If they bail out Evergrande, there would be a risk of moral hazard. Moral hazard occurs when an entity has an incentive to increase its exposure to risk because it does not bear the full cost of that risk. Evergrande is only one of the many heavily indebted property developers in China. If the government were to bail out Evergrande, it would signal to its fellow competitors that the government isn't serious about the 3 red lines and will bail them out if they are in trouble. The government wants more fiscal responsibility, and bailing out Evergrande would send the wrong message. But the thing is, Evergrande's footprint is massive, They are estimated to owe customers 1.6 million homes, and they employ 200,000 people directly, but hire an additional 4 million people a year for its various projects. So if they go bust, millions of people will feel a financial pain. There will be financial and social instability. While the government may be willing to let Evergrande fail, watching millions of its citizens suffer from Evergrande's fallout and the financial instability that may spread through contagion is less than ideal. So what's the government going to do? Limit the blowback as much as possible. The question isn't as much if Evergrande's default can be prevented. Rather, if Evergrande fails, it has to be allowed to fail in a controlled and orderly manner where the damage can be minimized as much as possible. It needs to be controlled chaos. Chinese authorities have tasked local governments to prepare for Evergrande's possible demise. They describe it as getting ready for the possible storm. The CCP will let Evergrande struggle for as long as possible to show other Chinese companies that they need to be more financially disciplined. They are only to step in should the situation get out of control. Their main job is to prevent unrest and minimize the effects on home buyers and the economy at large. As mentioned before, the banks move at the CCP's will. They act to further the government's economic policies rather than their individual interests. Whatever the banks and Evergrande may have negotiated, one thing is clear: Evergrande is still standing. Could it be because the CCP is worried that if Evergrande collapses in a disorderly manner, that it could cause serious social and financial problems? The courts are also controlled by the CCP, so any effort to force Evergrande into bankruptcy would need the approval of high-level leaders. This would ensure that Evergrande's assets aren't sold at rock-bottom prices, hurting the economy in the process. The CCP is encouraging other companies to buy assets from Evergrande to help it raise money to meet its debt obligations. This would not only allow hundreds of Evergrande's projects to be completed, but the millions of workers working on them to get paid. Completing these projects would be instrumental in avoiding mass social and financial unrest. The government thinks Evergrande has resources to pay its debts. It just needs the time to be able to do so. These moves are designed to give Evergrande the time to slowly unwind its assets and pay its debts in an orderly manner. But Jim Chanos, the legendary investor who predicted the collapse of Enron, thinks the worst could be yet to come. Evergrande's bloated debt is a symptom of an economic model where the growth is driven by debt, creating a massive bubble. As he explained, there's lots of Evergrandes out there in China. Evergrande just happens to be one of the biggest. But all of the developers look like this. The whole Chinese property market is on stilts. Will the government be able to deflate the property bubble before it pops? Or will they have to bail out the whole sector with Chinese taxpayer dollars? Let me know what you think in the comments. Speaking of taxes, did you know billionaires have figured out how to pay less taxes than you? And it's totally legal. One billionaire paid so little that he got a child tax credit of $4,000. Check out the video up top to find out how he did it.